Let's talk about the brain on motherhood.
Let's talk about the brain. Welcome, Jodi. So happy to have you here, Dr. Jodi Pawluski. Did I say that last name right?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I nailed it. Real quick, Jodi is a neuroscientist. She's also a therapist and an author and a mother. And she has studied the neuroscience of motherhood and perinatal mental illness for 15 years now. And
Yeah.
she speaks nationally, internationally about all her research findings. And I got to delve into just a tiny bit when we chatted before about the fascinating effects of parenting on the brain. And so I'm super excited to hear from you. Jodi's been featured all over the place, New York Times, Boston Globe, Marie Claire, just to name a few. And so thank you for taking the time to chat with us on our We Got You Mama Summit. And I am fascinated by all things brain. I love that you wrote your book all about it because I think we are so hard on ourselves, on
Mm.
mothers, and we use that excuse, mommy brain, right? Like
Yeah.
forever, right? My kids are older and I'm still using that an excuse. And I don't know if I should call it an excuse, but I would like you to kind of break that down for us. Like, what is it exactly? What are we referring to when we say it? Like, we know what we're talking about when we say it.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you for having me. And it's great to be here and share some of the science, right? Some of the facts for people,
Yeah.
for moms out there. So we really know what's going on with our brains. But this term mommy brain has really been around, right? To really signify our, feeling like we're not functioning as we should. And so there's been some research showing that about 80% of women will say that they are feeling like they have a foggy brain or they can't concentrate as well during pregnancy and the postpartum period. And it's pretty common. And there hasn't been a lot of research on it, but definitely the research has been very consistent when asked how you feel your brain is functioning. There seems to be this general feeling that it's not functioning as well as it should. So, and there's been a recent study showing that this is somewhat related to the feelings of isolation or the isolation that has really come with modern day motherhood. It's coupled with sleep deprivation. And also when you're isolated and parenting, you have a lot of interruptions, right? So it's hard to get back on task. And so I think we need to do more research to really figure out what's happening in the brain and why mothers are feeling like their brain's not working, because actually we know the brain's working pretty well. But I think there's something about the home and environment. But before we get into that, I think it's important to point out from the studies that have been done where pregnant moms and postpartum moms, where they're given actually a memory test, so paper and pencil test in the lab. So they're not asked, it's not about how they feel, but actually how they're doing, is that very often they're doing as well as a non-pregnant person, or actually in some tests they're doing even better. However, there is perhaps kind of a consistent slight deficit in trying to find your words as a pregnant person or postpartum, and a slight maybe deficit that comes out on these tests that are specific to kind of short-term memory. So where you parked your car, perhaps it might not be working as well, but nothing that should interfere with your daily functioning. But of course, this is when you're in a lab environment. So you're in a nice quiet space. You don't
Sure.
have someone's probably taking care of your other kid if you have another one, or your baby if you're postpartum. Like it's all like, ooh, it's like Zen, right? In a way. So
Yeah.
your brain is kind of there to focus on this, study at hand and the questionnaire. So you're really, in that environment, I think that's really important to emphasize, is that your brain is actually functioning really well. It just gets bogged down potentially with a lot of stuff going on at home. And we did have one study where we had women come into the lab and participate, but we also had them go home and have to do a memory test from home. And in fact, they were really good at everything in the lab, like the non-pregnant women, but at home, they didn't do as well on the memory test. So your brain is actually doing really well, but you have to give it an opportunity kind of to perform as it needs to perform. But I think this really ties in with this whole mental load concept we've been talking about. And so for me, I don't want us to think of our brain as being something not functioning as mothers. So I'm not a big fan of mommy brain to denote this kind of negative functioning of the brain. So I'd love us to change the terminology or use it in a better way. But I think there's definitely something to be said about this interplay between the mental load we talk about more and more now and how we feel our brain is functioning, right? And how it might be functioning, of course, when we have a huge mental load. So for me, often I think of mommy brain as like this term that we use to give us kind of, there's camaraderie in it, perhaps, but it's also a little bit of a cry for help, I think. And
Yeah.
I think we just really need to acknowledge how much our brain is doing, but other people need to acknowledge that too and support us so it can do what it's supposed to do. So, yeah, it's quite interesting, really, this whole area, but it hasn't been researched very well, which is also disappointing.
Right. I
Yeah.
found it fascinating when you talked about, and it was an aha moment for me when you said, well, your brain is functioning quite well because you are all of a sudden having to take care of a new life, and so it's learning new things all the
Ex
time, and that's often
exactly.
bogged up because you're like, and I have to keep a human being alive. Like I grew it, and that
So,
took a lot, and now I got to keep it alive, and I have to do all these things I've never done before.
yeah, exactly. So that's, I think often we're like, oh, I'm forgetting. Oh, I can't think clearly. Like it's more like cognitive, but we don't actually acknowledge we're learning how to parent. And
Yeah,
learning to parent is like, you have to learn things rapidly and you're going to make mistakes and that's normal. But this is
right.
really what your brain's doing. It's primed to rapidly learn how to care for your infant because your infant needs care, right? And you're keeping a human alive. Like this is a big
Yeah,
deal. But we
it's a
don't
big
notice that, right? We notice when we forget our
yeah,
keys, partly because we're
yeah,
told we're going to be forgetful, but we're not noticing like that we kind of we're learning how to care for
yeah.
our baby. There's actually one study that's I think is it's really
I'm gonna
phenomenal in
pause here.
that
Do you hear my freaking dog? Do you hear my dog?
no.
Okay. I'm gonna go put him like he's barking at my
Okay.
neighbor's dog and it's a whole thing. I'll edit this out
Okay, okay.
and
Yeah,
we'll
no
jump
problem.
right back in. But I'm like, if that picks up on the audio, it's gonna be super distracting.
Yeah, go for
I'm
it.
gonna keep recording and I'm gonna edit, but I can't with this. Hang on.
Okay.
Hey. How unprofessional.
So the dog
Ah,
or the dog is
he's
outside or
with
how does
me
that
now.
work?
No, he's
Okay.
this I don't know, the place we're at, they send a gardener like sometimes, but it's
Oh,
not a consistent thing. And so he saw the gardener and like lost his mind. And he never barks like that. So I was like, who's in my house? What is
yeah.
happening?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's okay.
Okay,
Um,
I'm just gonna rewind and then we'll start kind of
okay.
um
I or I can pick up where I
let's
kind of
just
left
I
off.
yeah. I'll go and I'll repeat just what I said about when I was really fascinated when we chatted and you talked about how, you know what, your brain is actually functioning brilliantly. Maybe you didn't say brilliantly, maybe it doesn't, it's not functioning brilliantly, but
Yeah, I
we're
didn't say
learning all these
brilliantly,
new
but
things.
yeah,
Our brain is brilliant.
yes.
When baby comes, how to care for baby, like we spent all this immense energy growing it, right? And that took a lot.
Yeah.
And then now we have to take care of this new life and we've never done it before. We might have read all the books or listened to all the things. And like, it doesn't matter. Your brain is still learning and computing.
Yeah.
And I have to take care of extra life and I'm not sleeping well. And so tell me more about how, like, hey, your brain's awesome. It's keeping new life alive and what that kind of effect that has on our brains.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great way to think about our mom brains, right? Is really reframe our thinking around it because it's actually doing something really amazing. It's keeping a baby alive,
It's a
right?
lot of work.
It's a
Yeah.
lot of work and it's rapidly learning to do that. There's no switch that turns on in your brain when you give birth or, you adopt a child or what have you, and you know what you're doing. For sure not.
Right.
It's a whole learning process, right? And it's not something that's unique to women or mothers, fathers, other parents. They all learn how to parent. Some faster than others, of course, depending on
Sure.
motivation and experience, but their brains also change. Their brains maybe won't change in the same way or at the same rate as someone who's been pregnant and given birth because there's some differences there. But
Right.
this is something you have to learn. Parenting is very much learning,
Yeah.
and your brain is doing amazing things. Like if you think about it, you're keeping a human alive. I also think pregnancy itself is amazing because you're creating a human. Like that's
Yeah.
wild. And I
It is
don't think
wild.
we appreciate that. Like we don't appreciate caregiving and the skill that goes into caregiving in general, and especially of an infant, which can't tell you what it needs, right?
Mm-hmm.
With words.
Right.
So there's a lot going on in our brain to try to figure out how to respond to the child, how to regulate the child, how to help it understand what its needs are, right? And I think that
Yeah.
this is very much brain, but we just don't give our brains enough credit. But I will, since we're talking about the brain, I also want to just talk about some of the main kind of changes that happen in the human brain, because there's often quite a bit of press about this. You might have read, that your brain shrinks in pregnancy.
Yeah. Tell us the real science
So
behind
I'm
all
going to
of
tell
this.
you some key points just to clarify some
Okay.
things. So across
Okay.
pregnancy, so first of all, I'll say there are many different changes that happen in your brain, but we know most of this research from research in animal models, which is something I work with, like laboratory rats, because you can really look at cells and neurochemicals invasively. But I'm going to talk
Mhm.
about what we know about the human brain more broadly and summarize some key points across pregnancy. So across pregnancy, yes, there are many areas of your brain that actually do shrink, let's say, but they
Mhm.
become a little bit smaller from preconception to postpartum. So many areas of the brain that are important for parenting, and they become a little bit smaller. So about 1% on average, there's a decrease in these brain areas, such as the amygdala, parts of the prefrontal cortex, and what have you. But this is actually not related to any changes in memory. So I want to clarify that just because it's smaller, I like to think of it as dynamite comes in small packages, right? I
Okay.
mean,
Yeah.
a big brain, like this 1% change, actually, we talk about it, or I've written about it as fine tuning. It's kind of fine tuning and becoming more efficient. This is an idea, a way to think about it. So
Got
this
it.
decrease in brain volume is related actually to an increase in feelings of bonding or positive feelings towards your child. Okay, so, and
Okay.
this is very consistent. So, most pregnant women will have these very similar changes, this kind of shrinkage or fine
Mhm.
tuning essentially of their brain size. But in addition to that, the brain has to function, right? So in human brain research, often what's done is looking at blood flow and changes in blood flow. And so what we know is, in fact, a parental brain or a person who's a parent, a mother and a father, depending on how much they interact with a child, but we'll see an increase in functioning or activity in brain areas that are important for parenting, but in particular when they're looking at their child, for example, or hearing a baby cry, you'll see this increase in functioning in these brain areas. And you see this very much in parents, but not in non-parents. So it's like the
Right.
brain becomes more active or fine-tuned to respond to baby, right? Functionally.
Interesting. Is it
Yeah.
does it also relate a little bit to hearing, or is it just that my mind's tuned in on a baby cry? Because I feel like now that I'm a mother times three, I can hear a baby cry that's like a mile away, right? And people are like, how do you hear that? I'm like, I don't know. I'm trained to hear that now. Is that like something that you're talking about that's also related to our brains?
Yeah, there's been some discussion about this, that there's maybe increased, in particular in females, because we have a little bit of a different auditory sensitivity. And some people have proposed that a mother will have this increased ability to hear their baby in the night. I actually don't think this is the case. And in fact, in my household, it's my husband who's always the nighttime responder and the first one to hear the child. So I think part of this is really, has to do with who's more attentive, perhaps, who's the lighter
Sure.
sleeper. And also, if you're the primary caregiver, so perhaps you are then listening for the cry more often because you're the one who's going to be responding. So I
Right.
think part of this is a learning process. And some people find crying more, triggering or
Yeah.
more uncomfortable than other parents. I think there's such a wide diversity. So I don't know if we as birthing parents are primed differently when it comes to auditory things, or if it's more of a
Yeah.
learning experience. But we have many more questions that need answers when it comes to the research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you talk about our brain shrinking, but
Yes.
becoming more efficient, it's a
Yes.
good thing.
It's like little packages
Making
dynamite,
room for good
right?
things. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a
Oh,
good thing. It's fine tuning. It's becoming efficient. This is how I like to think about it. And we
yeah.
see, from the research in non-humans that there's a lot of fine tuning type mechanisms happening at a cellular level, for example, that we anticipate is also what's happening in the human brain. But it's a lot of, I like to think really of this efficiency, fine tuning idea. And this is just size because, I mean, do we really care about size so much? Isn't it about function, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really important to remember the function is actually enhanced in response to baby cues, for example. So that's important. Yeah. But it's also important because often when we hear about shrinking brains, we think, oh yeah, I'm losing my mind for sure.
Right.
This is why I don't remember anything.
Science says my brain is shrinking.
Yeah, so of course I can't do anything or remember the keys or whatever, but this is actually not true. I mean, we haven't found a link between those changes and memory, but I think it's more of a fine tuning. Like you're getting rid of the stuff you don't need and you're honing in on what you need to do, which is keep baby alive and figure
Right.
that out, right? And that's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's been going on since the beginning of time, right? Because we're all here,
Yeah,
right?
somehow it's worked out on
Yeah, that's
average.
it. Yeah, on average.
Yeah.
So let's delve more into like what happens with the brain with perinatal mental illness. I was someone
Yeah.
who was a little bit freaked out when I got pregnant because I've struggled with anxiety and depression, and I just felt like I was gonna be, oh well, because I've been this way and been diagnosed and been struggling with this, like of course I'm gonna end up with postpartum depression or like some realm. And I felt a lot of anxiety that comes with being a new mom, but I was surprised it was more the opposite for me. And I know that isn't, I was, I found myself relieved of the anxiety almost like right when
Yeah.
I got pregnant. I was not as anxious. I wasn't and maybe it's because I experienced a lot of loss before I finally got
Mm.
pregnant with my first. So I was like, I'm pregnant and it's lasting and it's gonna happen. And so maybe
Mm.
it was just that kind of kicked in. But can you explain more the science and behind
Yeah,
um,
and
what's
yeah.
going on with our brain when we're talking about mental illness, especially in this perinatal world?
Yeah, and I think that this is something that's also really important just to say that all these mental illnesses have a biological basis. They're not just pretend or made up. There's always a biological underpinning, and often it's in the brain. There's some, things that are working in a different way. So when it comes to perinatal mental health, which we know is, or illness, which we know is quite prevalent, right? 1 in 5 will have high rates of anxiety or depression either during pregnancy and or the postpartum. This is really important to kind of understand that it can happen to anyone and, to not prepare for this, but know where to turn. I think that's
Correct.
important. So especially if you've had a history of mental illness, I mean, definitely check in with your healthcare provider so that they know, and talk to them about your concerns, because it happens, right? Our brains kind of do their own thing sometimes, and pregnancy and postpartum is a big transition in life for females, for women, and there's a lot of pressure to be a certain way, which doesn't always work out, right? If you think it's going to go one way and it doesn't, and so it can be a big disappointment and it caused a lot of problems with us, how we feel mentally, in particular. But in terms of the brain itself, if we delve in more specifically in the brain, we do see that the brain of someone who has high levels of depression, for example, functions in a bit of a different way. And there's been some research also showing that the structure might be a little bit different in some brain areas, actually not as small as in a healthy mom, let's say. So there's these differences we're starting to see more and more in understanding the link between the mental illness and the brain structure and function in humans. And I think this is really important, because if we can understand what's going on in the brain, we can better modify or create interventions, or preventions. So there's research in humans, that looks at, structure and function of the brain, which I mentioned those two kind of broad areas. And then there's also some research that's been looking at different neurochemicals and how they might change with postpartum depression, for example. And that work, I think in the States, you may have heard of the zuranolone, these new medications that have come out specifically for postpartum depression, and they really work on neurosteroid systems in the brain, so these neurochemicals, and they've been quite successful. And then if you look more broadly at some of the research in animal models, we're starting to see that potentially there's other factors, neurochemicals that we can target and understand when they aren't functioning how they should, and when they're impacting behavior, and causing a mental illness. But I think we really need to remember that we're allowed to have a diverse range of emotions in pregnancy and postpartum. So you don't have to be happy all the time. It's okay. You definitely can have a little bit higher anxiety, which is a bit normal. But if any anxiety or depression is starting to last for too long and you're feeling uncomfortable and it's interfering with your life, then you definitely need to seek some support. And it's not always hormonally based. There's this idea that it's hormones. For some, maybe it is the hormones to some degree, but the science hasn't proven that it's consistently the change in hormones postpartum that's related to postpartum depression or anxiety, for example. I think there's lots of different interconnecting systems in the brain, that are maybe dysfunctioning or aren't functioning well together, that will result in a mental illness during this time. But it's also important to note that this is a time when your brain is actually, as I mentioned, changing quite a bit, right? It's at its probably most plastic and changeable that it will ever be in adulthood, and is changing quite a bit in a short period of time. And so with that change comes perhaps a vulnerability to maybe some dysfunction or to mental illness, right? Dysfunction as in maybe dysregulation is better. And so I think this is also a time when we need to kind of protect our brains, in that way, and try to protect our mental health as best as we can. But, we need more research to figure out what's going on, but it's also a bit of a unique period. And I think we need to develop more unique treatments actually that are specific to what's going on in the brain with mental illness during this time, during pregnancy and the postpartum period. Yeah. So, but
a lot of moms get scared about, what if this happens to me? And then what if I have to take meds? And what about breastfeeding and those meds? And will it be okay? And is this safe? Is that safe? And then they start to get even more anxious and more depressed surrounding,
Yeah, it's really stressful. So I've done a lot of research on medications in pregnancy and the postpartum and how it affects offspring outcomes, particularly the antidepressants. So the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors like Prozac. And, the research overall, and I've kept up with the research in the clinical data in humans, and overall, the research is showing that if the medications are working, And if the mom is feeling better during pregnancy and postpartum, that's actually best for mom and for the developing child. And so, in fact, through lactation, the effects would be very minimal on any child development and even during pregnancy. So, if your medication's working well, then that's best for you and baby. And I think that's really important to consider. Also, if you've been on medication and you get pregnant and you think it's best to go off the medication, it's actually something to talk to your healthcare provider about, because going off medication, antidepressant medication when you're pregnant is very much linked to having a relapse of mental illness. So, if you're on the meds, stay on the meds, because they're obviously normalizing something if they're working well, right? And that's better for you and baby. I mean, there's been research out recently that's been great, showing there's no link between prenatal SSRI exposure and an increased risk of poor behavioral outcomes in your child. So it's not, antidepressants in pregnancy are not linked to increased risk of autism, increased risk of ADHD in your child, increased risks of poor motor abilities, increased risk. There's been research now that's been done very well, controlling for or taking into account also mood symptoms, comparing with siblings in the home, that have really shown that this not the antidepressant that's linked to an increased risk. What often is actually the problem is a mom that's really depressed, or really, really anxious and not getting the support she needs. That's not good for her, and that's not good for anyone around her, right?
Mhm.
But that being said, just because you're depressed or anxious during pregnancy and the postpartum period, or during pregnancy or the postpartum period, not both, this also doesn't mean your child won't grow up perfectly wonderful and functioning well. So a lot of the research shows, oh, there's an increased risk of, but it doesn't mean just because you're anxious that your baby will end up, I don't know, with all sorts of issues,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I think it's important also to remember that. And sometimes we get bogged down with the headlines from the research articles,
Mhm.
and then we start to freak out really as mothers, right?
Right.
I mean, I was pregnant with my second, had a scheduled induction because I was overdue. And my husband came home and he said, you didn't read the paper, the news headlines today, did you? And I'm like, yeah, I saw the study showing that induced labor has increased risk of your child being schizophrenic. I was like, too late.
Cool. Well, baby still needs to come out. So,
Yeah, so what am I going to do, right? But
yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
science, if you go to the paper and you're a scientist, like it's really hard for non-scientists to figure out the details of the study, but actually it'll be like the increased risk of 0.5%. So it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it's slightly different than the normal population.
Right.
Yeah.
Which,
But that being
really.
said, you don't need to feel ill in pregnancy and postpartum, right? There should be, I would hope, in an ideal world, enough support for you and your brain so that you can have a healthy transition, feel well. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we're missing in many places, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I feel like so much of the reason surrounding why I'm doing this is so that we can bring people like you to kind of set us straight in that way, and then also have access to your information and you and be like, ask those questions. I mean, like, this is what I'm hearing, or this is what so and so told me. And they're a doctor. And you're like, okay, well, is that their specialty? Well, have they done, 15 years of research surrounding this? Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
let me fill you in on what I know and what I have studied and what science has proven. You're fine. You're fine to stay on your meds. You're fine. I've seen close friends relapse from going off, and then
Yeah.
it's taken a lot postpartum to get back on, and it's not working. And then to increase doses, it's not working. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
like, it's very empowering to be able to learn more, from people like you, um, and then take that with us on the journey, and whatever you choose, find that there's support in that choice, right? And there's people here that you can ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I am pro whatever is going to help you and what the science will
Yeah,
support. So of course, if it's medication, there's certain medications, of course you need to talk to your physician
right.
about to know exactly if they're okay or not. But there's also other interventions, right? That
Yeah,
we can also explore. Some people find increasing exercise can be really beneficial. Some people
right.
find a slight switch in nutrition or more social interaction is needed and the isolation is a factor. But that's not everyone. For people who
Right.
have more significant symptoms of mental illness, they probably are going to need definitely some medical support that way, right? But I mean, also, these are biologically based to a large degree, illnesses. There's obviously
Right.
an interaction with society because
Mhm.
society fails mothers in many ways,
So
right?
many.
So we
Mhm.
don't cherish caregiving, like I said, we don't value parenting in general. We don't set up, support systems or access to care or, childcare resources. Like there's a lot that society doesn't do for mothers specifically, yet they expect mothers specifically to be the primary carers and to be all this. And if we're going to talk about the brain can only do so much. Like our brains are pretty amazing. But if they're
Yeah.
like loaded on with a ton of expectations and to-dos and pressure and stress, they're just not going to do what they're supposed to do as well, right?
Right.
And
Like
I think
any
this is
organ,
kind
right?
of,
If we're
pardon?
super hard on it in, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I
multiple
mean,
organs.
there's definitely people that have the symptoms of like quote unquote mummy brain, like brain fog, and don't have
Sure.
kids. It's because they have a lot going on in their lives, right? But
Right.
they
Or
don't
taking too much
actually,
space.
it's not the same kind of experience for sure. But if there's too much going on, your brain's just not going to work as it should. And so I always
Right.
think, let's like, if you're not feeling well, if you're feeling more depressed or anxious, it's your brain actually telling you something, telling you something
Yeah.
that you probably need. So what do you
Yeah.
need? And so is it a trip to the doctor? Is it time alone? Is it extra care? Is it like what is it? And that's, using it as a signal of checking in on yourself, I think is a lot better way of looking at even mommy brain, right? Even if you're like, oh, my brain's mushy. I'm like, I'm always thinking, then what does it need? Because it's not
Yeah.
working as it should. So what does your
Right.
brain need? I think it's really
Well,
important,
we forget
especially
to
as
put
mothers.
ourselves first, right? We forget to put ourselves first and realize that that's not selfish, that it's critical.
Yeah,
It's
because
so,
a parent's brain is actually the brain for two humans because
yeah.
your baby's brain is developing and sorting itself out. So you're actually the brain for you and for baby. But this also
Mhm.
means no one can do this for a long time and all by themselves forever. So you need
Yeah.
other adults or other people that can be there to support you, or either by taking care of baby or actually just being a support for you by doing
Right.
other things, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
We weren't meant to do it alone, for sure.
no,
We're not.
never meant to do it
Impossible.
alone. It's
So
really
how
like,
can
yeah, go ahead.
Jinx go ahead?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying if somehow we think that we're supposed to do this all alone and there should only be one care provider that's the primary one, and this isn't really not how we are, and it's not beneficial for the parent, it's not beneficial for the child, like it's just not how we're supposed to be as humans. We're supposed to be more
Right.
social. So I think
Mhm.
we need to get back to that and
Yeah.
really acknowledge how our social system, how it's important and what supports. It doesn't mean you have to, people are like, oh, but I don't have the village I'm supposed to have. And now I feel bad about that. But I always think your village can be many different things or different people. They don't have to be family or close friends. They could be like babysitter. A babysitter could be part of the village, or I always bring up like the pizza delivery guy can be part of the village if he comes every
That
Thursday
just
or
came to mind.
whatever.
I was like, the person that delivers food, yes, 100%.
Yeah, so your village can be made up of different people that contribute to you feeling well, or at least contribute to helping in the household, right?
Mhm.
In some
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Yeah. In some
Yeah.
way, like you can
Yeah.
offload it. If you can also accept help, I think we're, sometimes a little too
Yeah.
caught up. Like, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And it's like, why don't you
Yeah.
accept help from the friend that's like, what can I do for you? Oh, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm just tired. Accept the help because nine times out of 10, people will. And because they want to, right? I think it's human
Yeah.
nature to like want to help and support. So also just accept that from the nice neighbor who wants to drop off some food. Say yes. Just say yes. They love to do it. They wouldn't ask if I think sometimes they're surprised when you say yes because people always say no, I'm good, no, I'm good, no, I'm good. Like say yes, accept the help.
Yeah.
They're going to
It's
be
hard
just
to do
fine.
though, right? Like it's
Yeah.
often hard to do that, especially for some reason, like as mothers, because we feel like we have to do it all or something. I don't know. There's something that's difficult to, it's difficult to be vulnerable maybe. Maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I agree. Say yes if someone's offering. And also, you know what? If you think you're having a hard time but you're not telling anybody, I guarantee there's another mom, probably in your friend circle, probably at your exercise class, probably at the coffee shop where you go, who's like also struggling, but putting a brave face on. And I think we need to share these stories. It's not
Yeah.
easy to be a parent, and it's not easy to be a mom in particular because there's so much pressure put on that role of, how you're supposed to do it. And so, yeah, I think sharing our stories and acknowledging just how diverse healthy mothering is, right? Healthy
Mhm.
parenting, it's a range of different things that are
Yeah.
healthy. It's not just this way. It can be many
Oh,
different
there's so
ways,
many
right?
different journeys and so many different ways of, yeah, of doing it
Yeah.
healthily.
Yeah. And your brain is like helping you on the way, right? You just have to give it the space to do what it needs to do. And the support that it needs. So, yeah, I would
What
hope in
can we do?
future.
What can we do to support more of, that brain health?
Yeah. I mean, apart from acknowledging that society fails us as mothers, point. Finding our communities can be really helpful, but I also, get people to check in with some basics, like how's your sleep? How is your eating? Like, have you had anything fresh? One thing, like, have you had a banana this week, right? How have you seen any friends or, had any time to yourself? So there's that social aspect. And then also, have you been outside for even a brief walk? Like, are you moving, right? And so those are some kind of basics. Some people use the acronym SELF, right? Sleep, exercise or movement, laughter or social interaction, and then F for food or nutrition. And I mean, the thing is it also can be really overwhelming to think of like all the things I have to do to be well and to self-care. So I always think, well, can you pick maybe one thing? Or if it's something like sleep, for example, like you haven't slept for 3 hours in a row for a long time, then I really like to delve into that and be like, okay, how can we get you more sleep? Right. So in places where there's like family support, a partner, I mean, usually we can come up with some sort of idea that something that will work so the mom can get more sleep. Sleep is a big, big thing our brain needs to function. It's medicine for our brain. I can't tell you enough. And it's not meant to be sleep deprived in the postpartum. I talked to a sleep researcher about this. I'm like, does our brain just do different things in our circadian rhythm? And she's like, no. So, and sleep, we know it's really linked to mental health. So, this is something I'm kind of a big fan of prioritizing and figuring out how you can work with your partner if you have one in the house or with, a family member if you're a single parent and how you can get some increase to your sleep periodically at least, especially in the early months or the first year, because it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
We
when I
can't
kind of
survive
push.
without it.
You
We
can't
can't
survive without
survive
it.
without
Also,
sleep or food. Yeah.
yeah, you can't survive without sleep or food. And you usually feel better with a bit of exercise, being outdoor, green space, and doing something you enjoy, right? Watching a good show, having some time by yourself, going with some friends, going out with friends if you want. So these things are important, but sleep and food are big deals. So but this also, it's not like you go have a sleep or what do you need me to do to help you sleep? No, 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 no. People need to be like, give me baby. I will do the first 3 hours. You go off to bed. And that's it. Right. So I think that
Yeah.
we have to change the way we kind of offer our help, but also the way we ask for support as well.
Yeah.
But
You're
that
gonna
being
get
said, there's definitely people I will say out there, don't be stressed out if you're not sleeping all the time, but just know that this is something maybe that if you're not feeling great, you could maybe modify and it could actually be a big difference for you in the long
yeah.
run.
I
Yeah.
mean, how many times did you get that first real stretch in that newborn stage of sleep and you're like, I'm a new woman. Like you just also, baby, are you alive? And
Yeah,
then like,
yeah, that's usually like, baby, are
oh,
you alive? Like, what
panic.
happened? Yeah. And then it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe this is the new phase where they sleep for 4 hours straight every night. And then, yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah, no, it's
But
not. I mean, we
yeah,
have some awesome sleep experts, that are going to be
good.
that are a part of this summit, and we're, get into a lot of those circadian rhythms and what it does to our brain and how well we can function on X amount of sleep and, ideas and different things
Okay.
surrounding, yes, baby sleep, right? But also mom's sleep. Because it
Yeah.
lasts for so many years too. And so I'm really excited to delve into like, okay, your baby's 9, 10, 11, 12 months, still not sleeping through, right? Still not sleeping through the night, but,
Yeah.
should. How many, tips and tricks are out there that are directly, related to science and, what is biologically good for our babies and what they're capable of at, each stage
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that first year of life. Because when you sleep, and you sleep well, right? Healthy sleep. It's a game changer when your baby sleeps well and has a healthy sleep and, a schedule. Like sometimes we're so rigorous with their schedule. I've learned so many fascinating things just about baby schedule and how much of it maybe can be a little bit more flexible. I had a sleep expert come to one of our Fit for Mom classes. We do stroller classes outside, so you can bring your baby with you. New babies out to, get outside, work out, move your body. And then a sleep expert came and talked to us after class. And we talked about how, okay, can moms come 3 days a week, even when baby's nap, is in that late morning? Of so many people stop coming to class and then miss it. And miss
Oh,
that
okay.
community and miss getting out because they're so stuck on these babies' schedule. And
Ah,
she gave me the she let me know that like if your baby is on a schedule the rest of those days that it can be altered a little bit, once everything has been kind of nailed down is in line. Those 3 days a week you can come out and you can push baby's nap a little bit and it won't affect them in any way, shape, or
yeah.
form. And I was like, can we just like shout this from the mountaintops? Because we stopped doing so many things for us because it's all about them and they need to stay on the schedule and they need to like, and they need, and they need, and they need. And it's like, but how good is it for you to get outside, to move
Yeah.
your body? How much happy are you when you come to class and get to chat with other moms about all the things? And I think we sacrifice almost a little too much sometimes, for these little ones, and it's to our detriment. But
Yeah,
they're
I agree.
it's a
Somehow,
whole thing.
we've moved beyond, I think, how it used to be parenting wise. We've become a very child focused
Yeah,
and less emphasizing, our needs and, also the fact that, your child, it's not so bad if their routine's kind of messed up a bit. Like they have to learn, right, to regulate. I mean,
yeah,
if it's disruptive then for the rest of your day because they're upset, then for sure maybe
sure,
this isn't
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
time
yeah,
for it, or maybe you can go for half the time and someone can babysit baby or something, right? But I think
right,
I also think when it comes to, because often we have hear a lot of the to-dos as moms, like here's a list of what experts recommend, and that can
yeah,
be very stressful. So what I do when I work with moms is I usually just ask them what are some thoughts they have about what would be helpful for them. And just to reflect on that a little bit, because often they'll come up with an idea that works really well for them and that they're comfortable with. So, I mean, for me, I'm really supportive of whatever a new mom wants to try that could be beneficial. So, some people want to do some sort of sleep training, some people are anti-sleep training. It doesn't matter to me as long as whatever's happening in that household for the mom is actually helping her, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is also really important as new moms in particular, is to remember that there's a lot of information out there, which I think adds to the mental load and the brain not
Yeah.
functioning. But also to remember to check in with yourself, like what do you think would be a good idea? Because usually there's something hovering there. It's like, oh, I had this kind of idea, but nobody's really done it, and I don't know,
Yeah.
so I think it's good to check in with what seems possible for you to do within, all these different tools you can do, but start with one and see if that works for you, and then switch to something else or what have you. Because, yeah, there's a lot of right ways actually
Mhm.
to parent. And so there's not one tried and true method. So I think that's really important, that you're going to figure it out, and you can do it. Your brain has everything it needs to keep baby alive and for it to develop well, but you just need to, pull on that, protect your brain, pull on the resources that you can to help you through this journey, for sure.
Yeah. And pick those that you trust, but then learn to trust yourself too. I think with all the information out there, we've gone kind of away from, trusting our gut and maybe what our brains are telling us is important, and I think
Yeah.
that's a thing to tap into, as well.
Yeah.
Learn
I
all
think
the
that's
things and ask all the questions, but also tap into, what you're feeling.
Yeah, because you are ultimately the expert on what's going on in your household, right? And what works for you. Sometimes it takes a while to figure out what you really need. So, by talking it through with someone or with a therapist or some sort of consultant, like maybe this is really helpful because, then you can kind of develop like a strategy that works for you and in your house, because it's really unique to the individual a lot of times, is the
Yeah.
methods they use for whatever, for sleep, for feeding, for, what stroller they decide to use yeah, like there's so much diversity, and there's very few wrong ways to do it, I would say. There's very few wrong ways. There's some fundamental no-nos we all are probably know about parenting, but most of the time there's a lot of right ways. You're going to make some mistakes and you're going to screw up, but in the long run, the goal is to help baby regulate, but also to keep you regulated as well, right? And that's really what's important.
Mhm. I want to feel regulated all the time. And that takes a lot of work, right? It takes, sometimes the therapy and the meds and the talking it through with people. I love that. It's like kind of clinical as that sounds, like, oh, regulation sounds awesome. It really
Yeah,
does.
I mean, you're
It's
not always
important.
going to be super regulated, but sometimes I feel like
Yeah.
if we think of
For
it
the
more
most
of
part.
this
Yeah.
way, it's kind of a bit more freeing. Like I just want to feel a bit
Yeah.
more regulated. And then I
Yeah.
was like, oh yeah, that's better than being like, oh my God, I don't want to have postpartum depression, or I don't. It's like, no, no, no. Let's just go with actually physiologically and in our brains, we just want to be able to be a bit more regulated. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what can I do to do
What
that?
it feels like. Yeah.
Yeah.
What can you do to like stay on that track? I love it.
Yeah.
So tell us where we can get your book, learn more about all the things. I know, you're part of podcasts and yeah, share us about
Yes.
she's giving us an
So
awesome discount on her book, Mommy Brain.
yes, so I have my book, Mommy Brain. It's up behind me here. It's published by Demeter Press. There's 30% off if you order it from Demeter Press and you use the code MOTHERS. So that will give you 30% off. For those who speak French and read in French, I actually have the book in French. It was first published in French, in fact. So
Cool.
same title. You can get it. Also, they're both available on Amazon. For the French book, I don't know if it's on Barnes and Noble or anything, but Amazon, you can get both of them for sure. They both come with ebooks. As an option, you can find also links on my website, jodipawluski.com. I'm on Instagram at Dr. Jodi Pawluski. I'm sure we'll put these kind of links in the
Yep.
in the
Yep.
show
I'll put it
notes.
either
And I have a
on Facebook.
podcast called Mommy Brain Revisited. And I interview other neuroscientists who study the parental brain and perinatal mental illness. And you can listen really straight from the researchers' mouths, essentially, what they do and how that's changing the parental brain. So I have a number of episodes already up. I do it about release one per month on average. And so you can really hear from the experts. What the science is telling us about different, areas of parenting essentially. So I have the podcast. And of course, if you have any questions for me and you want to look at some of, ask questions about the science or the research or what the research says about different things with regards to your brain, perinatal mental health and parenting, feel free to contact me. You can contact me through my email, Instagram. I'm also on Twitter at Jodi Pawluski. There's different ways, and I'm always curious about the questions people have. And also I learn in the process of providing an answer because I'm also curious about the science out there, especially in areas that I haven't done research in. So do get in touch.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much also for offering your availability to answer questions and, be there for other moms. I think that's so awesome. And that's my goal for this, is to have people that we can, chat with, that this doesn't just have to be an episode and a face on a screen, that you can click on our stuff, you can buy your book, and then you can actually reach out and be like, hey, this part in your book, ask questions, and that you're welcoming that. So thank you. Thank you. I think that
Yeah.
means a lot in creating this, supportive space for moms, dads, caregivers to come and ask questions.
Yeah.
So go buy her
Thank
book,
you.
Mommy Brain.
Yes.
Go buy it, go grab the hard copy, go grab the ebook, learn all the things, listen to her podcast, and then share it. Share it with other moms, other caregivers, other dads. Because I think
Yeah.
this is really important. I think it's important to, the more we know about ourselves and how we function, I think the stronger we'll be. So
Yeah,
thank you.
definitely. Yeah, yeah, please do. And please do get in touch and share it because I think the more we know, right? Like you
Yeah.
said, the stronger we're going to be. And I
Yeah.
think this is really what's important, especially for new parents and new mothers in
Yeah.
particular. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
big deal what you're
100%.
doing as a
Or even
parent,
third
right?
time around, right? Even
Oh my gosh,
third time
every
around,
time is a bit different,
I'm
right? And
learning
there's
all the things.
transitions. The second time is different than the first. I mean, we don't
Yeah,
have time to talk about all of that. I do have some of
right.
that in my book. So I have a section
Cool.
on mummy brain, section on how the brain changes in birthing parents, section on non-birthing parents and the brain, and then a section on perinatal mental illness, different ones, and pregnancy loss, and what we know about the brain changes with regards to those things in parents. So just, yeah, it's a book for you to learn what we know and what we don't know, and hopefully we'll have more support to continue research in this area to help moms and parents out there. Yeah, we need people interested in it too, right? So you have to start
Yeah,
to ask the questions so we can do the
exactly.
research on them, find the
100%.
answers.
Yes, thank you for all
Yeah.
your research and all that you do. And then I
Thank you.
appreciate you joining us. We got you, Mama. Jody's got you, Mama.
Yeah,
She's got your
I've got your
brain.
mom brain.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from France. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful, it's evening out there. So have a wonderful evening with your family. And then we will chat again soon. I appreciate you.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jody. We'll see you.
Bye.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.